Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. As Canada announces new sanctions against Russia, Ukraine is once again calling for more military aid in its fight against Vladimir Putin's army. A major news organization is being sued by survivors of the horrific October 7th attacks in southern Israel. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have more. And the head of the Highway 3 Twinning Association is not happy with Canada's Environment Minister. We will explain why.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Tomorrow is the second anniversary of Russia's war on Ukraine. Canada is joining the United States and the European Union in announcing new sanctions. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says in coordination with the U.S. and UK, Canada will be sanctioning 10 more people and 153 additional Russian entities. The U.S. is imposing 600 new sanctions on Russia, which will target Russian firms that support the Kremlin's war effort, including drone and industrial chemical manufacturers. There are reports that Ukraine is being challenged now with not having enough soldiers to fight back against Russia's invasion. Officials say they're also desperate for more Western military aid, which has been harder to come by as the war drags on.
2 years after Russia's invasion, things here look bleak for Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are complaining of personnel shortages and ammunition shortages along the 1,000-kilometer front line, where they're mostly dug in defense, trying to hold territory as Russia eyes an advance. Mobilization issues have resulted in shortages in personnel across brigades. It's felt by all parts of Ukrainian forces. Brigades complain that they're only 75% staffed. That means that commanders can't rotate their soldiers in and out of really grueling battles on the position for longer than a few days. It means they're tired, get injured quicker, and are getting sick. The ammunition problems compound this. In order to economize shells, commanders are only able to fire at very precise targets while getting hit by Russians relentlessly in multiple positions as intense battles ensue there. Infantrymen don't feel confident that they have the protection from artillery, and it affects all parts of the fight on the Ukrainian side. Russia has also had some victories. Recently, they took the eastern city of Avdiivka after long battles there, and this was their second victory in the war after the long and bloody battle for Bakhmut.
The mother of Russia's top opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, says that she's seen her son's body and that she's resisting strong pressure by authorities to agree to a secret burial outside of the public eye. Navalny died in a Russian prison last week.
По закону они должны мне сразу были отдать тело Алексея, но они не сделали это до сих пор. Вместо этого они шантажируют меня, ставят мне условия, где, когда и как должен быть похоронен Алексей. Это незаконно. При мне им приходят приказы то ли из Кремля, то ли из Центрального аппарата Следственного комитета. Они хотят, чтобы это было сделано тайно, без прощания. Они хотят привести меня на окраину кладбища, к свежей могиле и сказать: вот здесь лежит ваш сын. Я на это не согласна. Я записываю этот ролик, потому что они начали мне угрожать. Глядя мне в глаза, они говорят, что если я не соглашусь на тайные похороны, они что-то сделают с телом моего сына. Следователь Воропаев открыто мне сказал: время работает не на вас, труп разлагается. Я не хочу особых условий. Я лишь хочу, чтобы все было сделано по закону. Я требую отдать мне тело сына немедленно.
Now, following her husband's death, Navalny's wife Yulia has also spoken out and said she will continue to oppose Vladimir Putin by taking on the role of official opposition leader. Overnight airstrikes by the Israeli military on the central town of Deir al-Balah and a camp in the Gaza Strip killed close to 60 people. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Authority says the deaths included children. Rescuers rummaged through rubble looking for any survivors. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the war with Hamas will continue until all hostages have been released and the terrorist organization is wiped out. The war in Gaza has continued unabated since Hamas attacked southern Israel, killing more than 1,200 people back in October. Survivors of the horrific October 7th attacks have launched legal action against the news organization Associated Press. They say AP allegedly assisted the terror group by employing freelance photojournalists who are accused of being with Hamas. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari joins us from Los Angeles and has more details. Lisa.
It's a group of lawyers that have taken on this case on behalf of the American Israeli or American or the families of the survivors of the Nova Festival. That was that spring festival, or that was outdoors, where 200 plus young people who went, ironically, to a peace festival were massacred. So the lawsuit is being brought under the Anti-Terrorism Act out of Southern Florida, holding the AP responsible not only for hiring these photojournalists, but then purchasing the photos that were taken moments after the massacre started. Now, of course, the AP has already come out and said they have no idea, but just the fact that they purchased those photos, one of the journalists, there are three that are coming really under scrutiny, and many other that were, again, purchased by the CNN, allegedly knew about this or were embedded with Hamas. One of the photojournalists, Hassan Esmalia, his name has been brought out, has pictures with Yahya Sinwar, head of Hamas, and he allegedly rode into Israel on the back of a motorbike and rode out of Israel with Hamas as well when the attack started. There's also evidence of him posting on his social media platforms about half an hour before the attack began that there will be fruits to watch and enjoy, referring to allegedly the massacre that took place on October 7th. So we shall see how this will pan out. Of course, this will set precedent as to what responsibility these news organizations have in hiring these photojournalists that it looks as though they did have somewhat of a connection to the terror organization Hamas.
Thanks so much, Lisa. It appears as though support for Hamas by the Palestinian people is weakening in Gaza. According to TBN Israeli correspondent Yair Pinto, there are even a number of protests erupting by Palestinians against the terrorist organization. Pinto also says, according to recent reports, Hezbollah's leader has been putting pressure on Hamas's leadership to drop their demands for releasing the Israeli hostages.
Hezbollah leader Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah communicated to Hamas that their demand that Israel release hundreds of Palestinian security prisoners with background of blood on their hands is unrealistic, and Israel would not be able to comply with this demand even if it wanted to. Nasrallah has also stated that from the beginning of this conflict, he does not wish to fight a large war with Israel at this time. Rather, he said that we are fighting here to help the Gaza Strip in weakening the Israeli army, to make it difficult for it, and to increase the pressure. Even within the Gaza Strip, support for Hamas is disappearing. Last night, residents of the city of Jabalia in the north of the Gaza Strip and the city of Rafah in the south of the Gaza Strip went out into the streets to demonstrate against Hamas.
That was TBN correspondent in Israel, Yair Pinto. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, we enjoyed sunshine and mild temperatures again today across much of southwestern Alberta, but how's the weekend shaping up so far?
Well, not as great as we had originally thought, Hal. It seems that out of nowhere, this low pressure system is moving in, bringing with it the chance of some showers, possibility of some flurries even on Saturday. We are still looking at, it's actually just a 30% chance, so there's still a chance that we could see the sunshine this weekend. Probably not till Sunday, though. Also daytime high on Saturday, 2 degrees, which is our average high for this time of year. This evening, we are looking at an overnight low of -2, and today we saw those gusty winds, and those are going to remain through the evening. In fact, getting a little bit stronger, up to 70 kilometers per hour, and then diminishing to 50 per hour. And I'll be back later on the show to give you the full look at the 7-day forecast as well as the national forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The federal NDP say they've struck a deal with the Trudeau government on rolling out the first piece of a national pharmacare program. The deal includes full coverage for contraceptives, also coverage for insulin for type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and additional diabetes drugs. The agreement is a critical piece of the supply and confidence pact between the two parties and comes ahead of a March 1st deadline to table legislation. A number of rights organizations went to Parliament Hill on Friday urging the federal government to make changes to its medical assistance in dying bill. A representative with the Arch Disability Law Centre in Ontario says their clients with disabilities don't want MAID, they just want access to the support and services they need and deserve to live a better quality life.
Instead of getting services to support them to live with dignity in the community, they are given the impossible and false choice of living in the community in unsafe conditions or moving into a hospital or long-term care institution where they will get services, but will have to give up their dignity, independence, work, and relationships. These are not people who are dying or people who want to die. They are simply disabled enough to need a level of support in the community that Ontario does not offer.
The Alberta government announced new funding to support Alberta's skilled trades. Minister of Advanced Education Rajan Sani says if next week's budget is passed, the province will spend $24 million a year over the next 3 years to create 3,200 additional apprenticeship seats at 11 post-secondaries across the province.
There are more than 60,000 registered apprentices this year in Alberta, a nearly 28% increase over the last year. By investing in apprenticeship education, we are helping these apprentices develop in-demand skills to make their contribution to Alberta's future. The Canadian Apprenticeship Forum estimates that Canada will face a gap of more than 60,000 registered apprentices by 2025. That is next year. So what we're really faced with today is a challenge of opportunity. We've responded to this challenge with modernized legislation that brings new flexibility to regulation of the skilled trades and taken steps to improve Alberta's apprenticeship credential system.
The pre-trial has begun for the remaining 2 of the Coots 4 still being held in custody. Chris Carbert and Anthony Olenek face charges of conspiring to commit murder of an RCMP officer at the Coots border blockade during the COVID-19 pandemic. A number of supporters came down to the Lethbridge courthouse to support the man being held for 2 years, including one man, a supporter from BC.
It is very unfair that people like ourselves who've come from British Columbia, been following this since the original convoy, that we've got to set out in the corridor. I think even the prosecution complained that they have to walk amongst this group to get for a recess or for a break. But there's a room down the passage which is totally unoccupied at the moment, which will hold 75 people. So this, it really seems to have been a political motive, as my opinion. I've asked them to dispel that there was and I'm still waiting as yet to get a response.
2 of the Coots 4, Jerry Morin and Chris Lysak, were released from custody earlier this month following a plea bargain. Lethbridge County is dealing with some external fraud. Officials say close to $30,000 worth of vendor payments were intercepted by an unauthorized party. They say upon learning of the breach, Lethbridge Police, their financial institution and insurance company were all notified and an investigation is underway. In an email, the county's Chief Administrative Officer, Cole Beck, says they want to assure ratepayers and business partners that their financial information remains secure. He said this incident was a sophisticated effort to exploit accounts payable, and there's been no data breach or release of any financial information. The folks with the Highway 3 Twinning Association here in southern Alberta were not happy with the recent comments made from Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. Guilbeault recently said that Ottawa should not be funding road projects. He then walked back those comments, saying he was actually only referring to a tunnel project in Quebec. Bill Chapman, president of the Highway 3 Twinning Association, says the initial comments from Minister Guilbeault have him quite concerned.
It's quite disturbing, in my opinion, that we have a situation like this when we're trying to create economic corridors all across our country, both in transportation and other utilities, including rail, and air. And of course, this really comes at a time when we're trying to twin Highway 3 from Medicine Hat to BC. And of course, as you know, Highway 3 is also on the National Corridor System or National Highway System. We're comforted or optimistic that the Ministry of Transportation for the province of Alberta has identified this an appropriate schedule for funding for the next 10 years. And we hope to see 8 phases of this Highway 3 completed through those next 10 years as we progress right along.
Chapman says his group has visited Ottawa and delivered multiple sources reflecting the need for funding national highway improvements. As for Phase 1 of Highway 3 Twinning, Chapman says it should begin later this summer, take around 2 years to complete. A privately built lunar lander made history as it successfully touched down on the moon earlier today. The robotic spacecraft became the first American vehicle to accomplish the feat in more than 5 decades. The lander, built by Intuitive Machines, touched down around 8:23 a.m. Mountain Time. Officials said it had to overcome a late-stage glitch with its onboard laser instruments. The Nova C lander, also known as Odysseus, is now the first American spacecraft on the moon since the Apollo 17 NASA space mission back in 1972. Oh, very cool. Well, we had a mainly clear sky today in Lethbridge once again, but that may change beginning tomorrow as some clouds may roll in, along with the potential of some much-needed moisture. Full weather details are coming up. Well, we enjoyed another mild day in Lethbridge, being well above our seasonal value for this time of year. Jeanette Roche is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, as for the weekend, it's kind of looking a little like a mixed bag, correct?
Yeah, it really is, Hal. We're seeing strong wind gusts tonight, the possibility of showers and even flurries on Saturday. And then we're also going to be seeing that drastic drop in temperature as we get into the work week next week. But looking at a high of 2 degrees tomorrow on Saturday, which is still the average high for this time of year. And we're looking at above average temperatures on Sunday with clear skies. And then looking at snow on Monday, -10 for the expected high, down to -11 on Tuesday. Look at what's happening there. Then we're back up to the pluses again for Wednesday and Thursday with highs of 2 and 3 degrees respectively. Average high for this time of year, 3 degrees. Average low, -9. 15 was our high temperature back in 1983, and in 1940, we were sitting at -31. 7:27, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 6:04 p.m., giving us well over 10 hours of daylight. As we look to the west coast tomorrow, we're seeing a pair of 10s in Victoria and Vancouver tomorrow. Also, the possibility of some showers in the morning there, 30% chance. Edmonton and Calgary, clear skies, high of 10 degrees in Edmonton. We're seeing 30 to 50K winds there. Calgary could actually start to see a bit of snowfall tomorrow afternoon as well. As we get to the rest of the prairies here, Saskatoon is sitting at a high of 1 degree, mix of sun and cloud. Regina, high of 4, and then -9 in Winnipeg with clear skies. As we look to the central part of the country, here's where we are seeing, we're seeing plus temperatures, but in the morning we are seeing very, very high wind chill values, even close to -29 in Ottawa, for example, and a risk of frostbite. So, but the daytime's highs looking not too bad. 5, 4, and 5 again for Montreal, seeing possibility to some showers, changing to flurries, showers in Ottawa, and then same thing with that precipitation in Montreal. As we get to Fredericton, we're seeing 3 degrees for a high there, and showers changing to flurries. Same thing for Halifax, 4 for a high there. Charlottetown, actually both Charlottetown and Halifax, rainfall warning is in effect. Halifax could see 20 to 30 millimeters of rain, and then the possibility changing to snow and ice pellets. And then Charlottetown seeing 15 to 25 millimeters of rain, changing to snow. 10 centimeters of snow also expected there. So lots happening in those two cities. 2 for a high in St. John's, and seeing some shower activity there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
You know, it's not clear yet how many passengers are going to be left in the lurch once low-cost airline Lynx Air stops flying on Monday. The Calgary-based airline has filed for creditor protection. Company officials say rising inflation, fuel costs, exchange rates, and competition in the Canadian market all contributed to their downfall. WestJet is offering discounted fares for stranded domestic travelers and capping fares for Lynx passengers who may be stuck outside of the country. There are reports that the Canadian household debt-to-income ratio is around 184.5%. That means for every dollar earned, $1.84 is owed. That's quite the sobering thought. So how do you dig yourself out of that hole in debt? Kent Prestige, manager of Prestige Consulting, shares the first step to financial freedom.
The first thing you've got to do is you've got to find out what you're spending. In all honesty, a lot of people don't know what they're spending. I'm going to put it this way. They see the trees, the individual bills, but they don't see the forest, the total debt load that they're carrying compared to the income that they're carrying. So the first step is to find out what you're actually indebted to, what your totals come to, rather than just looking at individual bills.
Hear more helpful tips from finance expert Ken Prestige as he chats with BCN producer Michael Clausen coming up after Business News. The federal and Manitoba governments are putting up $60 million for a rail line and a port in the province's north. The money is aimed at finishing improvements on the rail line to Churchill on the coast of Hudson Bay and at redevelopment of the port of Churchill. The railway, owned by U.S.-based Omnitrax, was shut down after flooding back in 2017. That left those in Churchill facing higher costs as goods had to be flown in for more than a year. A consortium that includes First Nations communities called Arctic Gateway Group took over ownership with the federal government help back in 2018. Toyota Canada has recalled 28,000 of its vehicles because of a transmission problem that can lead to crashes. The recall applies to the 2023 and 2024 model year Toyota Tundra, Sequoia, and Lexus LX600 vehicles. The auto manufacturer says certain parts of the transmission may not immediately disengage when the car is in neutral, which may keep the wheels moving. It says vehicles are at risk of creeping forward at low speed when they're on a flat surface and no brakes applied. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 95 points on the day to finish at 21,413. The Dow was up 62 points to 39,131. The S&P 500 was up 1 on the day to 5,088, and the Nasdaq was down 44 points to 15,996. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $2.12 to $76.49 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 13 cents to $1.60 US. Gold was up $11.02 on the day to finish at $2,035.40 US an ounce, and silver was up 20 cents to $22.95 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.16 per bushel, barley's at $5.99, canola's at $12.89, and corn is at $7.32 per bushel. Live cattle were up $2.10 to $185.60. Feeder cattle March contract was up $2.53 to $254.58, and lean hogs were unchanged for the April contract at $87.20. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to $74.05 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Alberta government announced new funding to support Alberta's skilled trades. Minister of Advanced Education Rajan Sani says if next week's budget is passed, the province will spend $24 million a year over the next few years to create 3,200 additional apprenticeship seats at 11 post-secondaries across the province. You know, so many people are struggling with debt right now, especially with the higher interest rates. There are some vital steps you can take to help you get out of debt. Alberta financial consultant Kent Prestige will share details in an interview with BCN producer Michael Clausen in just a moment. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, check out our website and some of the number of stories and interviews we have featured there.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. For people with special needs and disabilities, Ability Skate invites you to a dedicated sensory-friendly public skating program designed especially for you. Taking place Sundays from 1:45 to 3:15 p.m. and Tuesdays from 1 to 2 p.m. at the Civic Ice Arena, you're welcome to put on your skates and glide on the ice in a dimly lit, no-music environment. For details, visit leisure.lethbridge.ca. Discover how Lethbridge has played an important military role in the preservation of world peace and security by visiting the Lethbridge Military Museum at the Vimy Ridge Armory at the Lethbridge Airport. The museum is open to the public each Wednesday from noon to 4 p.m. Special arrangements for other days and times can be made by calling 403-328-6196. Admission is free, but donations are gratefully accepted. For more information, visit lethbridgemilitarymuseum.org. Lethbridge Sport Council's Indoor Roving Gyms program takes place Tuesdays at Emmanuel Lutheran Church from 6 to 7 p.m. and Thursdays at the Service Sports Center from 10 to 11 a.m. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. Pre-registration is required and space is limited. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The average Canadian spends more than they earn, and unfortunately, that's a trend that seems to be increasing and not decreasing. Well, is there a way to get out of debt? Is there a way perhaps to prevent from going into debt to begin with? Today's guest has some advice on this. Kent Prestige has years of experience as a CFO. He is the owner of Prestige Consulting and also an instructor at Reeves College here in Lethbridge, Alberta. Welcome to Bridge City News, Kent.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you here, and it's an important topic that needs to be discussed. Maybe not one of the easy conversations to have. You probably create a lot of butterflies in people's lives. But I was recently reading that Canadian household debt to income ratio is about 184.5%. Can you explain what this means and describe how badly in debt are we?
Well, this is a real problem in Canada, and it's been getting worse for years and years and years. And what it means is that for every dollar of income that the average Canadian has, they have $1.84 worth of debt. So when you multiply that out, the average Canadian is in what we would consider pretty sad shape. For example, in the United States, this same number was 1 to 175, and that triggered the 2008 stock market crash that they experienced in the United States. And what happened down there is people were carrying more debt than they could afford, and defaults on mortgages led to the near collapse of the US economy, if you remember 2008.
Yeah. Now, would the Canadian government or the Canadian economy be able to sustain something like that?
Well, what I'm really concerned about as we look into the future here is that we would have a real serious problem. We have a different banking system than the United States has, and our banking requirements are a little bit more stringent than they were in the United States. But it doesn't get over the fact that we've had some serious increases in the last little while in inflation. That's driven the Bank of Canada to raise the interest rates. And people that were paying 2% on a variable rate mortgage are now going to be paying 4 or 5, maybe even more. And that is going to put a lot of stress on the market. And the problem is most of those people haven't renewed yet. So our problem is not over. A lot of people think, oh, we're going to lower the interest rate here right away, so the problem is over, but it's not, because a lot of people with 5-year term mortgages, they're going to come renewing in the next few years here, and they're going to have a substantial shock to their budgets.
Right. So are there any thoughts on why Canadians might have a mindset that causes us to spend far more beyond our means, or is it just the frog in the pot of boiling water scenario?
Well, it's a little bit of both. As I go back and I look at, I graduated from high school in the 1970s, and I go back and I look at that, we all wanted to have the same standard of living as our parents. Our parents had nice houses, nice cars, nice furniture, and so we wanted that. The problem was we weren't willing to wait the 20 years that our parents worked to achieve that. So a lot of us, especially in the early 70s, debt became very easy to acquire. That was kind of the point in time when credit cards became widely available, widely accepted, the early 70s. And, and now, of course, we also add to this easy debt that we've been allowed to accumulate. We add to that the inflation cycle that's happened again. But by the way, that inflation cycle is not new. In the 70s, we had the same thing happen. In fact, I would suggest even to a far deeper circumstance. I remember mortgages that were 18% interest. If you could you imagine 18% mortgage interest now at $400,000, $500,000 homes? It would just be a catastrophe.
It certainly would. I have another question then about debt. Of course, one of the things that we see is the shops that do payday loans. Is that kind of that next step as people are kind of going through that debt funnel, so to speak?
Oh, I have real bad feelings about payday loan. In fact, I would caution anybody that's watching today, if they are taking out loans from payday loans or those type of companies, I kind of call them legal loan sharks. The interest rates are outrageous. The fees are even more so outrageous. And I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster. Credit cards are bad. Payday loans are even worse when it comes to the type of debt that we structure. So I caution people to stay away from payday loans for sure.
Right. Now, as people find themselves in this debt vortex, is there a first step that you would recommend for people climbing out of debt?
Well, absolutely. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to find out what you're spending. In all honesty, a lot of people don't know what they're spending. I'm going to put it this way. They see the trees, the individual bills, but they don't see the forest, the total debt load that they're carrying compared to the income that they're carrying. So the first step is to find out what you're actually indebted to, what your totals come to, rather than just looking at individual bills.
That makes a lot of sense. I had recently heard that Canadians on average could be $21,000 in credit card debt. Have you heard that similar kind of number?
Actually, I'd tell you that the number's probably worse. I know of people who have one or two, three credit cards maxed out to $30,000 a piece. And when you start talking $30,000 on a credit card that's charging 24% interest, that's outrageous. In fact, one time I did a study for myself, and I did a spreadsheet to find out how long it would take to pay off a credit card if indeed you just paid the minimum payment every month. Now, the minimum payment in Canada is 3% of the balance. So say you had $5,000 on your credit card, 3% is your minimum payment, but 2% per month is the interest that's being added to it. So I believe and I can't remember exactly, but basically, if you got into debt in your 20s, you'd still be paying off that credit card in your 60s.
Wow.
And that's just because you're only making the minimum payment.
Right. So one really has to attack that principal amount.
Absolutely. That is definitely the key.
So my question then for you is, how does one pick from, let's say, 4 or 5 debt sources, which one gets that attack against the principal first?
Well, there's a couple of different strategies that you can use to accomplish that. The first strategy, the one that it worked for me, it's the way I did it. I took the smallest bill that I had. Maybe it was $1,000. I can't remember. I've been out of debt for quite a while now, but I took the smallest debt that I had and I concentrated on paying it off. Every penny I had, I put on that debt. As soon as that debt was paid off, then I took the payment that I was using to pay it, I combined that with the payment for my next smallest debt, paid that off. When that was paid off, I took the payments from all three now and started paying on the next smallest debt. Now, a variant on that same one, and the reason I picked smallest is because, you know what, you can clean it up quickly. And you know what, when you're starting to dig out a debt, you're not going to be spending a lot of money. So it's pretty tough. You know, so pick something that's going to give you hey, I got out of debt on that one. So I took the small one. Another strategy that can be very similar to that is to go after the bill that's got the highest interest rate on it and pay it off first. But typically that tends to be your credit card debt. And a lot of people, like I just said, there are people that have $30,000 on a credit card. And that is not a small debt to pay off. And it's going to take some serious hard work to do that.
Now, speaking of hard work, interest, of course, seems predatory and is such a challenge once we're down that road. Can you speak to how we need to maybe change the way we're living and viewing money that would actually help us to prioritize the payoff of debt?
Well, I mean, what happened to me is I started looking at my debt. I actually sat down, figured out what I owed, and I said, this isn't viable. I have to fix this. I have to change it. So you have to have a paradigm shift. You have to decide that I'm going to live below my means while I pay off the debt so that I can live above my means or equal to my means after the debt is gone. So it does take a paradigm shift or a mind changing. And it takes a word that everybody hates. It's called discipline. You have to discipline yourself to not go out and spend money.
Right. Well, and it's so easy to get attracted by the shiny objects, and it's easier to eat out, and it's easier to just go and do this instead of look for the thing. I know I have it somewhere. Can you talk maybe about some simple tasks that we could do around the house that would actually help us to live below our means?
Well, certainly if you can do repairs. Now, I have to admit, not everybody's handy. I grew up doing repairs and learning how to do woodwork and all those other things. So, for example, around my house, if the tap's leaking, I'm going to fix it. I'm not going to call in a plumber to fix that. If something's broken, I'm going to try and fix it. I'm not going to pay for a service that I can do myself. Well, in my case, I do all my own taxes, but again, that's part of my job too. But I mean, anything that you can do that can, save some money along the way. I used to have a little problem with my furnace that the sensor would get dirty on it, and then it wouldn't light, right? The fire wouldn't come on. So I paid the repairman once to come out, and he showed me how to fix it, and I fix it myself now. So anything that you can do to reduce your expenses is going to give you more money to turn around and pay down that debt. I mean, something as simple as not buying a coffee every morning on the way to work. A coffee by itself, about $2 a cup for a cup of coffee, $10 a week, $40 a month, right? That's $40 a month that you could be using to pay down some debt. So again, you can make little lifestyle changes that can make huge changes in your finances.
Right. And it's good to track those things too, because if we can measure something, we can control something.
That's the whole thing. Going back to my original statement there, that a lot of people don't even know what they're spending. They don't know what their debts are. And without knowing what their debts are, that puts them into a position where they spend because they just don't know. And that's a horrible situation. If you know, you're going to say, no, you know what? I can make coffee at home instead of buy it on the way to work, right?
Exactly. Now, we often hear about debt consolidation loans. It seems at first glance that this might be a wise plan to go to your bank and ask to amalgamate all of your debts. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I hate to disagree. It can be, if it's done right, it can relieve some of the interest burden that you might be carrying. But here's the problem with debt consolidation loans. You go to the bank, you might have 5 or 6 different payments that you're making. You borrow the money to pay off the debt on all 5 of those loans. But then what you do is you make your loan payment smaller so that you're not squeezed so much financially. And then the next thing you know, you're either spending that extra money, not saving it, or you are out getting more debt. I don't recommend debt consolidation. It's good business for the banks, but unless you are extremely disciplined and unless you keep your payments at the same or even a higher rate, if you get a debt consolidation loan and you make the payments a little bit bigger so that you pay it off faster, that can be a benefit. But again, unless it comes down to that word that I use that nobody likes, it's called discipline. You have to discipline yourself to be able to handle your finances.
Absolutely. And that making those extra payments on whatever it is, whether it's a car loan or a consolidation loan or a credit card, makes an enormous, enormous difference.
Well, just think about it. I was just reading an article actually this morning that said that the average American on their credit card debt alone is accumulating $100 a month in interest. That's just interest. So, I mean, that's money that you're paying for nothing, really, just for the use of somebody else's money. That $100 would go a long way to paying down debt if you didn't have that interest card interest, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you have any final advice on maybe how to change our mindset on personal debt and our spending habits?
Well, the final thoughts would certainly be, if you're a Christian, follow what the Word of God says. It says in Proverbs, it says that we're supposed to plan if we want to be well off. So do your planning. Don't just let things happen to you. Make things happen to your money. Instead of just kind of sitting back and accepting whatever happens, you make it happen by your determination and by your discipline.
That's right. And there is a chapter in Proverbs for every day of the month.
Absolutely. And not only that, you can manage your life by Proverbs.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Thanks so much for being with us today, Kent.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
It was our pleasure. That was Kent Prestige. He is the owner of Prestige Consulting and an instructor at Reeves College here in Lethbridge, Alberta.
For a number of environmentalists, the countdown to the end of the world from the threat of climate change is on. British author and activist Zion Lights has taken the challenge to offer viable solutions to the doom and gloom surrounding climate alarmism and government mandates. She's also a former spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion UK on both radio and television between 2018 and 2020. Zion, thanks so much for joining us today from Exeter, England.
Thank you for having me.
So what's your perspective on the current state of global warming alarmism? How do you think it really affects the environmental discourse today?
I think the problem is that people have become very negative, and I don't think any problems are really solved by just focusing on the problem itself. I think we really need to think about solutions. And what you have is a whole generation now of young people with high levels of eco-anxiety saying that they don't see the point, that their futures have been taken away. We heard Greta Thunberg say this. And, this isn't a reason for them to fight back and to fight for positive change in the world, which is a real shame because actually some of the loudest voices in that area are those with the most powerful voices in the world. If you are from this kind of background like I am, grew up in the West, you're actually quite privileged and there's a lot that you can do. So I think the alarmist rhetoric is just actually preventing action from happening, even though perhaps the people that came up with the idea thought that it would alert people and push them into action. It's now become detrimental, I think, to the cause.
What are your thoughts on some of the young people I've seen that are actually throwing food at artwork and art galleries, or they're gluing their hands to a highway? I've seen some young people being hauled off the Autobahn so they're not killed. I mean, the Autobahn in Germany, last time I checked, there's not a speed limit, so that's pretty dangerous. What are your thoughts on some of those actions from some of these climate alarmists?
I feel sorry for them. I think they're being misled and they're being told that they have to put their entire futures on the line because the problem is that serious. And if they don't, then they're part of the problem. And so these young people are risking jail. They're risking, as you say, quite high risk, quite scary scenarios. Here they block roads, they hang from bridges. And they just, you watch videos of their interviews and they, I think they're kind-hearted people who really want to see change in the world, and they've been misled and they're anxious. They haven't been led towards solutions. They're being told that there's an apocalypse coming and that if they don't act, it's on them. And I think that's really quite dangerous messaging. And it's not solving the problem at all. It's not helping them. It's mostly just causing divisiveness. At least over here, people are getting very annoyed with them because they're just disrupting ordinary life every day. And, as I say, there are so many positive solutions that they could fight for if they put their energy in that direction. I think they'd be brilliant. But unfortunately, that scary narrative has really taken hold on a lot of young people now.
Oh yeah, you're seeing it all over the place. Now, Zion, considering your background in science communication, what evidence-based solutions do you believe can really effectively address climate change, especially in the context of nuclear energy?
So first of all, we've been sold a lie by the traditional environmental movement, which is that we can solve this problem by all addressing our individual actions and doing less. Now, it might be true if you have a really, really highly carbon intensive lifestyle, but that's a very small percentage of the population. Not going to touch that for the minute. But if you think about most of the things that we're being told to do, these are very, very small differences that they make to the world. Yes, you can recycle, and I do recycle. Yes, you can eat less meat, or you can drive less, or whatever. But it's a very, very small difference that's going to make, actually. And yet so many people who care have put their drive and emphasis and money into that. And it's kind of fraudulent, actually, because if you look at the actual problem, all we need to do is address our emissions. Bring down the emissions. We don't have to sacrifice our quality of life. We don't even have to sacrifice convenience to a large degree. We just have to bring down emissions. Now, that can be attained buy large quantities of energy. Now, historically, that energy has come from fossil fuels because they are reliable, they've been cheap, they've been plentiful, and they enabled us to escape human poverty. Most of human history, we did live in poverty. Now we need another abundant energy source that isn't highly environmentally taxing, that doesn't create air pollution, doesn't drive climate change. That is nuclear energy. That's the scientific consensus that it's needed to decarbonize. The only large industrialized nations in the world that have managed to do without nuclear is just Norway, basically, because they have a lot of hydropower, which is a geographical advantage. Most places don't have a lot of hydropower, and even other countries that do, like Sweden, still have a lot of nuclear energy in the mix. And Sweden actually is now building new reactors as well, because they're thinking ahead to the fact that actually we're going to need more energy to get out of this crisis. It's not just about nuclear either. You think about a lot of the other solutions. What are we doing? We're switching to electric vehicles. That requires more energy. We're going from gas boilers to heat pumps. That requires more energy. We are an energy-rich civilization, and we will remain an energy-rich civilization. We only need to make sure we meet those needs and increasing demands instead of telling everyone to live with less.
So how do you put people's fears at ease when it comes to nuclear energy and nuclear power, that we don't have another Chernobyl incident?
So, I mean, Chernobyl is a really good example, actually, because it will never happen again. It was an RBMK reactor, which they're not built anymore because it was known that this was a flawed design. It was a flawed design, but the Soviet Union created it, so they wanted to use it, and they built lots of them. Well, actually, nobody builds these anymore, ever. And the few that are still in existence in Russia, they've been upgraded so they can't explode. But that flaw was that that reactor was capable of exploding. Modern reactors cannot explode. So it was really a one-off situation. Equally, there's a problem that the government at the time the Soviet Union didn't want people to know what had happened. So they brought people on site to try and clean up the problem, who were then exposed to more radiation, when actually what they should have done is completely evacuate the area, and they would have prevented a couple thousand deaths. But even then, I think you have to look at it in context. So what I usually say to people who are afraid of nuclear energy is to look at the statistics, because the numbers really speak for themselves. The number of deaths from nuclear are a few thousand in total across history. That includes Chernobyl, that includes Fukushima, and that includes 3 Mile Island. The latter two, nobody died because of the meltdown. A lot of people were afraid and panicked, but nobody died because of the meltdown. So actually, then if you look at deaths from fossil fuels, talking about air pollution alone, there's at least 9 million deaths a year attributed to burning fossil fuels. I mean, this is a no-brainer, even if you don't care about climate change. I mean, I think we should care about climate change, but even if you take that off the table, we need a clean source of energy that still provides us with our high-quality lifestyles, and that is nuclear energy.
Solar and wind power often hailed as green energy solutions at different sources. Zion, what are your thoughts on these renewable energy options?
Well, I think the term renewables is a bit of a misnomer because it lumps together so many different things. As I said, hydropower is very reliable, very powerful, also has an element of danger. Everything has an element of risk. If you think about the Bankyo Dam disaster in China, there's a few 100,000 people died, again, more than from any nuclear incident ever. I'm not saying don't build it. I'm saying there's always a risk. So a lot of people think they like wind and solar because there's less risk. But the problem is, A, they still require a backup energy source for when it isn't windy and sunny. So that's either going to be fossil fuels or nuclear. B, there is a risk if you're trying to put your whole energy grid in one basket, like Germany did with Energiewende, which was their plan to phase out coal, phase out nuclear, and just do renewables. They spent billions and billions, tens of billions on building wind and solar power. And then what happened? What's happened now? They've had to reopen their mothballed coal-fired power stations because it cannot be done. This transition cannot be done with intermittent energy. People don't want to live with intermittent energy. People don't want to have to ration energy. And frankly, we need lighting and heating and air conditioning, and for our hospitals to work, and all of these ordinary things that we've become very used to but are very energy dependent. So they've now backtracked on that. But you do have other countries now, like Australia, trying to follow a similar plan. They're closing their coal-fired power stations. They're not lifting their ban on nuclear energy. They're instead trying to do just wind and solar, and they say the batteries are great. If you look at the batteries they're buying, they're spending billions of pounds on 3 big batteries. And let me tell you something, each one of those batteries will only store electricity for 3 to 4 hours. That is the science. Anyone's free to look that up. It's a mistake, actually, and I think it will put a lot of people out of jobs, which will just make them fight against an energy transition that does need to happen. It'd be much better to do what they're doing in America, where they're shifting over coal workers to a nuclear industry and making sure they still have the jobs. They use existing infrastructure. This is a good, healthy energy transition, but let's not rely too much on intermittent sources of energy.
So if you were to put them beside each other, solar and wind versus nuclear power, how would they really compare in terms of sustainability and efficiency?
So, I mean, they can work well together, and there's lots of countries that have managed that, like France. And I tend to represent the scientific consensus, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the same report, the same body that puts out the report saying we need to act on climate change. They've also said we need a combination of nuclear and renewables to make this happen. And I think part of it is that there's a social license for wind and solar that isn't necessarily there for nuclear in a lot of countries. In some countries it is, but in some there's still an uphill battle. So to some degree, it's easier to get them built. Also, the upfront cost looks very cheap if you don't factor in the backup, if you don't factor in the fact they need to be replaced every 20 to 25 years. But that is creating a lot of waste, and that does mostly go to landfill. Now, some people will say, they'll argue with that and say, but we can recycle them. Well, then we should, and that should be a cost that's in that original kind of, when you put that money forward for wind and solar, it should be costed in, and it's not, because actually they do tend to end up in landfill sites. So what we're doing is we're choosing something that lasts for less long, that takes up an infinitely, significantly bigger amount of space than nuclear power plants, because they require a lot of land. And then they need replacing after a couple of decades, and then that goes to landfill sites. So actually, if you look at it really honestly, it's not the greener option at all. This is, again, kind of fraudulent claim that people are making. I think having a panel on your house that helps provide some of your own electricity, that could be quite a decent way to go ahead if you're willing to then replace that in 25 years and make sure it's recycled. But otherwise, you're better off having a nuclear reactor down the road, providing good, clean, unionized jobs for people, and that will produce a lot of energy with a small amount of land, using a small amount of space for a lot of people for 60 plus years. In fact, in Finland now, they've just extended their 60-year reactors so that they will run for 80 years in total. I mean, that's a lot of bang for your buck, I think.
Speaking of big bucks, let's circle back to nuclear energy here for just a moment. And Alberta Premier Daniel Smith here in Canada was talking about the potential of nuclear energy for our future, but it's quite costly. A lot of investment is needed, and it takes a lot of time to build these nuclear power plants here. Now, in your view, what are some of the big misconceptions surrounding nuclear energy?
Well, so I think one of the conceptions is what you've just outlined. So the cost and the time to build. So the average build time in the world of all the reactors ever built is 7.5 years. That means, yes, some, like in Britain, by the way, we're taking quite a long time. We've had a lot of issues with losing workers and Brexit and then the pandemic. It's taking a long time to build reactors that in South Korea, they're taking only 3 to 4 years to build. So South Korea is a really good example as well, because after they built the reactors, they found that each one, the price of the unit comes down because they just take the workforce and put them on the new reactor. It's like making a Lego model, and they just churn these things out. And now they've struck a deal. They just struck a deal with the UAE, where COP28 is currently being held, where they went, we have no industry, we have no nuclear expertise. How do we build reactors? So South Korea went in, sent a load of engineers, set up an industry from scratch, and built 4 reactors. The 4th one's just come online. Now, these nuclear power plants have taken under a decade to build. And I'm talking about from the conception, setting up the industry. The actual reactors took 5 to 6 years. So it can be done quite quickly. And remember that, yes, all right, solar and wind, you could do that much quicker, but you'd still need something as a base load backup for that. You'd still need nuclear or fossil fuels in the background. This is just completely 100% reliable electricity. And yeah, now in the UAE, 25% of their electricity needs are being met by these 4 reactors. So they're kind of going, oh, that was great. And now we have this incredible expertise and all these engineers. Maybe we should build more and export to the regions around us, because they really understand the value of clean energy.
Now, you were involved with the group Extinction Rebellion. Zion, can you explain what that is?
So Extinction Rebellion was founded here. It was primarily an direct action, as we called it, based group where we would take actions to bring public attention and government attention to our 3 demands, which were declare a climate emergency, make commitments to net zero, and basically political revolution. I'll be honest, the 3rd one, which was a shift to citizens' assemblies from the current system, but it's basically political revolution, which I always argued with as not really relevant to climate change. What they say is that the system created climate change, so the system has to change. Anyway, this group really took off here. I was asked, I wasn't there at the conception, but I was asked to be a spokesperson, and I agreed because I felt that they were getting a lot of positive attention at that time, and I thought this could be a real good moment for change. And if I don't do this, other people will go and do these important television slots and they might misrepresent the data. That in the end, I ended up leaving because other spokespeople were doing exactly that. And I think that does more harm than good. But the movement itself, you know, this is where ideas like net zero and climate emergency and the term climate crisis have come from. They've all come from this group, which has been very powerful all around the world. Yeah, so I did a bit of work with them for a little while, but I think that they should change direction and focus more on solutions.
Now, you emphasize questioning everything and encouraging people to really think for themselves, Zion. How can we navigate the conflicting information about climate change and really make wise, informed decisions?
I think it's important to look at the official body. So I look at things like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You can look at communications from the United Nations. There are lots of groups. The IPCC is really important because it is the kind of top scientists working in these areas, the top climate scientists and other areas of science as well, crunching numbers and putting that data in reports and regularly updating those reports. Now, they're quite dry and most people wouldn't read them. So the problem is we rely on journalists and other people and people, you know, who just put videos online or write articles, who interpret this their own way. And you'll get people on both sides, some saying it says it's the end of the world. Actually, no, it doesn't. It has an entire chapter on mitigation and how we can fix this. Some say, it's not alarmist enough. You know, there's a lot of people on either side, but ultimately these scientists don't have any vested interest. They're just crunching numbers. And they are saying in these reports that actually there's a way out of this. And it does say that we need a lot of renewables and nuclear to do that, to achieve it. And it does say that it does say things like, you know, there are areas where we could reduce energy use, but this is not so much in people's everyday lifestyles as it is things like insulating homes. And a lot of these things are just common sense that we should be doing anyway, that really contribute to having a strong, healthy population and a strong economy. So I would point people in that direction to look at what the data says, or to look at what those scientists are communicating themselves, because they can be much better at explaining the numbers than lay people.
Zion Leitz is a British author and activist known for environmental work and science communication. Zion, thanks so much for joining us today from the UK.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.